right, welcome everybody. Thank you for attending this webinar. We're going to wait just a moment to see if anyone else joins, and we're going to begin momentarily to begin the presentation. So thank you for taking your time to join. And for those who hopped on just momentarily, just a minute ago, we are going to wait just a few more minutes and then we'll begin. All right, it's 6:03 and I want to respect everyone's time this evening. So first I want to thank you for attending this final presentation. This has been an exciting project and we're excited to be here. I'll first let me introduce myself and then I will kind of share the approach and how we're going to engage this evening and the agenda. So again, my name is Andrew Core. I'm the project manager with Pond. Tonight assisting me is Aubrey Saba, urban designer with Pond. So thank you, Aubrey, for doing that. And we're excited to be here. This is a webinar. We are going to have an opportunity for Q&A using an app, a device called Pigeonhole Live. So you're able to actually type in questions. I will show you how to do that. We're going to do the presentation. We're going to go through the entire presentation and then go to Q&A at the end. The intent of this presentation is to really show you the final plan. It's a very high level. The plan is very detailed, and so this is really giving you a snapshot. As we will be posting kind of the final draft online once it's complete. There are a few additional revisions we're making, and so we will be posting it online through the project website and linking that through the cities. Communicate that to you. So with that, I also would like to let you know this meeting is being recorded. And so we will be posting it online afterwards. So if you have friends or family or colleagues who are not able to attend, we would encourage you to send them to the website later this week, and we'll be able to answer those questions. So with that, I'm going to actually turn my camera off. All right. All right. So with that, I'm not going to turn the camera off. All right. So with that, again, just a couple of comments about the virtual meeting. Again, you are all muted upon entry. So just want to let you all know that you have that you're muted. We will ask questions through Pigeonhole Live. Pigeonhole Live is an app. You can do it on your desktop or you can do it through your smartphone, and we will show you how to do that here momentarily. So if you have your phone with you, I want to give this to you, everyone to you now. We will actually be doing it at the end of the presentation. But if you have your smartphone, you can simply take a picture of that QR code, and it'll take you directly into the Q&A for Campbellton. Alternatively, you can go to the website on the screen, www.pigeonhole.at, and you can enter that password. Now I will tell you, we will show this to you again at when the time is right for the Q&A. So we will show this to you and the information to you again. So this is not the only time you will see it. But once you're in there, once you go to the website, you enter the password Camp 2020. And you select here. Click here to see poll questions and cast your vote. So you will go here and enter the Q&A, and you will then be able to actually type questions into the Q&A, and we will then be answering those questions at the end. So as you see ideas during the course of the presentation you want to ask, feel free to type them in, submit them, and we will be able to see them when the time comes for Q&A. So you don't have to wait to the end to type your question, but you can go ahead and begin now. This is why we're showing this to you now. So there are several key individuals who are participating in this project. From the city standpoint, this is a joint project between the city of Chattahoochee Hills and South Fulton. So Mike Morton is the city representative from Chattahoochee Hills, and Dana Gray is the city representative from the city of South Fulton. As I mentioned, my name is Andrew Core. I am the project manager. Aubrey Sauber is our urban designer, and BJ Martin has also been participating as a senior manager of local government services. So this is the highlights of today's meeting. We're going to talk about the purpose and goals of the project, the progress to date, and we'll review the design principles and vision statement that was created for this project. We will show you the master plan framework, which is really the crux of the plan, discuss a little more detail of districts, as well as transportation and mobility, and conclude with implementation. As I mentioned before, I want to stress that there's a lot of information in the final document. So we're trying to keep this at a kind of a 10,000 foot level and hit the high points. So I encourage you, if you want to review the document in more detail, we will provide you that opportunity via the website. For some background for those who have not been involved in the process to date, I just want to reiterate certain aspects of the project. First off, this is a multi-jurisdictional project. So really kudos to both South Fulton and Chattahoochee Hills for coming together and working on this collaborative effort. It's really made the difference and made it a very good project. This was funded by the Atlanta Regional Commission's Community Development Assistance Program, also known as CDAP. The idea began to look at how to reconstitute Old Campbellton, which is really a historic crossroads village in the seat of former Campbell County. It was an opportunity to look at how we reestablish a historic downtown, and then look at how you expand it into a larger village and encourage development, and kind of encourage that synergy around this crossroads community. The recommendations in the plan include recommendations for design. They include recommendations for zoning and land use, for street networks, for transportation alternatives, recreational amenities, historic preservation, business development, and site development. So it was a very iterative process, and it's, I think, very holistic final plan. It also included analysis of the surrounding properties to examine the current use and relationship to the Campbellton Crossroads Village. So really had to understand the relationship between both. And we really see this as the plan. Really, one of the goals is to see this as an economic development center for both communities, and it's a gateway into both Douglas and Fulton counties. So I'm going to use my highlighter here on my laser pointer on the screen, but this is the project boundary in red here. As you can see, the orange line is the boundary between Chattahoochee Hills over here and South Fulton on this side. And this just illustrates a number, kind of a 1 mile, 2 mile, and 3 mile radius, along with all the different subdivisions, all the different number of the different recreational amenities and schools. So there's a lot surrounding this area. Just as an example, this was this city area map in more detail. Again, some key things to remember. This area was identified as a Crossroads community in the 2016, in Chattahoochee Hills 2016 comprehensive plan. As you all are very aware, this is predominantly a rural landscape and it has a number of historic resources. You also have a really major amenity in terms of the Chattahoochee River, which has recently been studied and examined as part of the larger Chattahoochee Riverlands project. And you have a couple different tributaries that feed into the Chattahoochee River that help shape the natural landform and terrain in the study area. Both communities have slightly different land uses, and obviously South Fulton is much larger in terms of population, but both communities have a large land mass. So to give you some example of kind of what we've done to date, this is just a snapshot at the effort we've taken to connect with different individuals, to engage with the community and what we're doing. So this has included continuous conversations with both communities. It's included a number of different stakeholder interviews, which have led to additional conversations with key members of the community. We've held 2 public meetings as part of this project. This is a 3rd public meeting this evening. We've held a workshop as part of the public engagement process with 10 different focus groups. We tried to connect with people in a variety of different ways, whether it be through postcards within a 2 mile radius and 3 mile radius, and also using project websites and respective city websites to communicate what's going on. We also met with each of the city's historic commissions to talk about history and how they can collaborate and create synergy in collecting stories and the oral histories of the area and continue to preserve the area. And we've also developed a framework plan, a master plan draft that's currently being reviewed by the project management team. We hope to have that finalized and completed very soon. So as part of this planning process, we developed a series of master plan design principles. And these are the 6 of them to help us kind of guide the approach. This is based on what we heard from the community through our social pinpoint or workshops. It's based on talking with the project management team and elected officials. It also included our personal observations and what we saw. But the 6 principles revolve around balancing the river, recreation with environmental sustainability, preserving the rural character of Campbellton and the surrounding area, but likewise also celebrating and honoring the history of the area, creating a cohesive and vibrant hamlet full of character and charm, and creating community opportunities for residents and visitors to thrive economically, socially, and recreationally. And finally, improve transportation safety and mobility throughout the Crossroads area. The Crossroads itself is the intersection of 2 major roadways and heavily influences the future development of what can occur there. As part of this process, we developed a master plan vision statement that really captures what historic Campbellton will be 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now, which, as it states on the screen, historic Campbellton is a thriving crossroads community nestled along the Chattahoochee River, welcoming visitors from the region. Its rethought layout straddles 2 cities and is responsive to the past, but charts a new sustainable course for its future. Campbellton is a model community that protects the rural heritage of the South Fulton area, designed with consideration for walkability, complementary architectural form, and community placemaking. So Campbellton is really important because there are a number of different crossroads communities throughout the South Fulton area. And we want to be able to create a good project precedent so that both communities can take this idea and expand upon it as they think about the history and the legacy of these other different crossroads and the early histories of Campbell and Fulton counties and Douglas County as well. So this is the master plan. Now we developed this, it's called a framework plan, and I want to be very clear about a couple things about this. Number one, this only represents one possible development scenario. Secondly, much of this, if not all of this, is private land. So, the major public infrastructure is Campbellton Park as well as the roadways. So we recognize that we're looking at this and it's really just an idea of how it could develop over time. But that requires the willingness of private property owners and other partner communities to realize this. Our goal is to help manage change well and preserve well so that we can really have a good sense of how to move forward with this project. And so as is shown, this really kind of represents a snapshot. This could develop in a number of different ways over time. A road could be moved here or moved there. It might look different depending on what the final outcome is, but it gives an idea of what could be done. And it illustrates how you try to balance commercial development, village style development, with residential development, with the rural character. That's really the intent here. How do you successfully navigate all three styles? So as part of this, we could develop a number of different typologies we're going to talk about here. There were 3 districts created. So on the screen, you can see these 3 districts. One is the community hamlet district. This is, when you think of a village, you think of that commercial core. That's what that represents in the red area. You have this transitional district, which really is along the edges of the commercial over here, as well as in here. That transitional district is a blend of residential. There's also a blend of commercial, some lighter commercial uses. Imagine a coffee shop, a bakery, things like this, things that work well in areas that have a little more intensity in terms of development and per acre residential development. So, and then you transition out to what we call kind of that rural living district, which is really, kind of single family homes, farmettes, these 2 to 6 to 10 acre lots that some of it exists today, but also in the future, how it's planned for is thinking about how those different areas can be developed and how they might look if there was a design, more of an intentional design to them as a collective development. So the idea is to show how these interact and work together. And this can be, these boundaries of this project site, I will say, were designed and created for this project, but are somewhat arbitrary in the sense that they can flex to some degree, and the methodology presented here can be applied beyond simply the boundary laid out. So I'm going to begin now by talking about the community hamlet district. What you see on the screen, the part of the plan is we developed a series of guidelines that gave you a sense of what the architecture might be, how it aligns with a couple of key elements. One of them being the MERPA, which is the Metropolitan Regional Protection Act, which really governs development along a 2,000-mile buffer, a 2,000-foot buffer, of the Chattahoochee River. It also considers what the community would like to see, the type of development that's appropriate, and considers the historic component. So this is the community hamlet district. As you can see, it has what you would experience in that kind of historic village theme. You have buildings that are built up near the lot line. You have wider sidewalks that are used for walking, but also potentially for places to eat and to gather outside. You have parking in the frontage here, street parking that may also accommodate things like even golf cart parking, golf carts as well. You try to organize parking in the rear or in concentrated locations that are very walkable. This also considers height and looking at that a maximum height, especially within the MERPA zone of about 35 feet, but it could raise. And the thing we've highlighted in the plan itself is this is not purely flat land. So you have to consider height variances and how the land slopes and be more flexible when you have sloped topography to account for that change in elevation. But again, you think about this idea also including sustainability, street trees, elements that are of good architectural form. Here's an image, a rendering created to kind of give you that sense of what that kind of style might be. Ultimately, what the style is designed is up to the owner, private property owner itself. But this really gives a sense of where both communities could take that and encourage that. And when we talk about what's going on here, we talked about how or what it looks like, what it actually is. It's very focused on high quality goods and services, boutique retail, some Class A office, some lodging, even some, you might have some condos and living above studio style lofts, living above, residential above retail. These are things that make it much more pedestrian oriented and walkable. And that's very important because it's already a busy area. So we think this is very valuable. And let's turn our attention to the transitional district. As I mentioned, this is really the buffer between what you might see in more of the hamlet style village, which is something much more rural, right? More agrarian. So this is in a transitional district, you're going to see a variety of styles. You may see some detached home and townhomes. You may see some individual homes. You will see opportunities for some live workspaces, maybe bakeries, small shops, to encourage that blend, right? You may have places for the garages or parking in the rear and have alleyways as well to promote that rear parking opportunity. You might also have some driveway aprons as well. So it's going to be a blend depending on whatever the final development might look like. But again, the building height is very human scale to kind of 35 feet max to keep it more of a soft transition to residential to maintain the character. And so again, you'll have areas where you might have 6 to 8 units per acre, and some areas that would transition to a quarter and eighth single family lots. So it would flex in terms of what, it would be flexible in terms of what you might see the transitional district look like. Here's an example, just a snapshot of how that might come to fruition. We have a variety of different housing types, again, wide walkable streets, but also maybe potentially some single family homes, etc. And you have the rural living district. This is largely what we experience out there today when we think of 2 to 4 to 8 acre properties, even some areas such as a 10-acre farmette, where it's very rural nature, and you've really kept a lower building height and really talked about setbacks and larger setbacks away from the road at minimum, but then also having a square footage of what you can build on that is scalable based on the property size itself. So it's not a one size fits all. It needs to be scalable and appropriate to the size of the building lot. But you also have opportunities for even things like maybe some small crops, meadows, in certain areas along major roads. We propose to have even some large multi-use trails, but in general, you're going to have very little infrastructure, no curbing, large bioswales, limited infrastructure in terms of utilities and things that would be very much hidden and maintain that rural agrarian kind of look. So we took this idea and we said, we have this framework of what development may look like, but let's look at now what it means for the realities for transportation and mobility, okay? And so we came up with 4 strategies, I would say, for these, and we're going to talk about them briefly. The area on the map kind of highlights a number of different ideas and strategies that we're doing. But first and foremost, we want to right size the roads, meaning that you have Campbellton, Fairburn, and Cascade, Palmetto, and we want to be able to emphasize good design on those roads. They are large DOT roads. They carry a lot of truck traffic. We understand that, but we want to think about safety and operational improvement and making sure that especially that intersection works well. We have developed a series of streetscape typologies for different street types. There's also the idea of operational improvements. This concept that how can we make the roads work better, move cars and people through them more easily and in a safer way, and also mobility improvements. So what if you're not in a car? What if you are in a golf cart and you live nearby? There is even, we've had discussions about equestrian users. How do they move around successfully? And also multi-use trails. So the greenway concept that is clearly very popular in this area. If anyone goes there on the weekend, you all know you have a number of different bike riders, avid road riders, but how do we kind of expand those mobility options? So as an example, This is Campbellton Fairburn Road as a proposed idea. It is going to be planned to be widened. This is the plan for it over the time. This illustrates ways that you can make the road safer and more human in scale, so it's not just it feels like a freeway. So things in terms of medians in the middle that are vegetated kind of frame the conversation. Looking at trees along the corridor, even separate road lanes where people park separately that are safe to access, and thinking about development here. Now these are this is an image that is looking west in Douglas County, and this is Masonic Lodge property over here to the right. This is the Bucard Farm property to the left, but it gives you that sense of what it might look like. And really the focus here is looking at how we have greenway options and open space, potentially wider sidewalks. These are very wide right-of-ways that Georgia DOT owns in this area. And so we're trying to be considerate of what they might look at over time. There's the alternative as well here of doing reverse angled parking. This is something that's been done now more and more in different communities because it is actually safer to pull out than to back out into roads, especially busier roads. So this is a variation of the two. The point to take away from this is there are ways to make Campbellton Fairburn Road feel like a road and not like a highway. And that's our goal here. So we want to plan ahead as the cities and Georgia DOT, they can think about expansion. What would it look like? What would a good, healthy expansion look like? Another example of Cascade Palmetto, slightly different look, but you have a similar condition in terms of very wide right-of-way. But the idea is you could have larger open space, you could have medians down the middle. Ultimately, our goal, where possible, is to make both sides of the street speak to one another and feel like they're part of the same community. So of course, we want to find options to do that. And that's going to require additional conversations later on as development occurs down the road with Georgia DOT and the respective cities to say, how can we make this feel like one location? But again, there's a number of different things that can be done. The image here really illustrates one potential option. There are many more. So we talked about operational improvements. This is another thing we want to highlight. We've really looked at this intersection as a real key intersection. I think what happens here can really dictate the type of good and future development would happen in the area. It's not a great intersection right now. We've looked at this. We feel like it is a really good opportunity for a roundabout and a multi-lane roundabout planning ahead. For the future, this could become a gateway. But we also think there are opportunities to not just think about this one location, but what about as you enter from Douglas County, or what if you're coming from the east, you're coming in, having multiple locations for roundabout to slow traffic through this entire area. This has been an ongoing conversation about how we slow traffic and make it much more human and hamlet and village to scale than simply a highway. So I think there are things that can be done to accommodate traffic moving through here, but also the people who want to live here and walk here and use restaurants and shop here to make it feel safe and inviting. We've also looked at other things like potential stop signs and locations and key areas of stoplights or stop signs, and even what we call hawk signals, which are signals for pedestrians and bicyclists. We think about greenways and connectivity through this area. Again, that's all part and parcel of a larger conversation as these roadways get developed. But we want to come up with a holistic strategy to make sure we're thinking about the various users. We also developed a series of streetscape typologies, as I mentioned, thinking about, we've got these major roads, but what happens on the interior of the development? What does that look like? We want to be thoughtful as we think about that. So as an example, we have a main street. What does a main street feel like? What's a good main street feel like? If you go to a downtown or you go to historic villages or healthy, vibrant communities, what you'll see are wide sidewalks, low speed streets with on-street parking, the idea of limited setbacks from the road for buildings and residents. We've introduced the idea of even rolled curbs so it doesn't feel so harsh with a strong 6-inch curb. We're making sure there's benches and lighting and street trees, all that make a very friendly atmosphere and a very safe and welcoming atmosphere. But there are also roads in here which are more local roads, where you may see more residential, may not be the main access, maybe some smaller businesses and shops. We make sure these function as well too. And what you'll see is typically these are 2-lane roads. You're still going to have typically less setbacks. But again, they're often more low volume in terms of the number of traffic coming through here, but you're still maintaining sidewalks and street trees. You're thinking about benches and things. Again, similar to a main road, but you're scaling it down. And it's really more for that local traffic, people moving through within the development itself. Of course, you have rural roads, right? So we talk about the rural zone and people moving through kind of these farmettes and driving as you propose any new future roads in there. These again are roads that are very simple in nature. You have, they're typically 22 feet, 24 feet wide. They do not have curb and gutter. They allow for natural drainage. You might see, you might introduce elements such as fencing, or in some areas even have greenways. So these are areas that make it are designed to meet the need and the aesthetic of the roadway, and still making it safe for multiple users. When we talk about multimodal transportation, we focus on the car and the street, but we also have to think about people who aren't necessarily in a car all the time. These are people who are equestrian users, who are cyclists, who ride golf carts, who are want to walk. There's significant gaps in that right now. So you obviously have a captive audience in this area with those who ride the silk sheets and the dirty sheets in terms of bike riders. You have a lot of nearby subdivisions right here, just anchoring to get outside and get access to nature. And you have Campbellton Park, which is over here, a major and will soon be even more of a major regional destination. And so we want to think about, how do we create greenway sections and greenways and connectivity in and around this area. So the typical way we do this might be as a greenway, where you're a bike or you're a pedestrian. Even regional greenways would allow golf carts. So walking and driving through here, you have waysides or rest areas. Typically they're made of concrete, some of it's asphalt. They have clear zones to make sure they're very safe and wide. They're typically 10 to 12 feet wide. It gives you direct access to nature. They are off-road. That's really important, right? So they're kind of within nature itself, but they provide access and a pleasant experience, right? But you also have situations where you might have greenways that are adjacent to roadways, even like Campbellton Fairburn, for instance, and thinking about how you have access, especially maybe to the east with Hampton Oaks and Les Jardins, these subdivisions who currently don't have access to the park, can't walk down Campbellton Fairburn. There's major gaps. You need to think about that and accommodate that. So here you have a different situation. You design side paths, which are really greenways adjacent to the roadways, where you have pedestrian lighting. You have wayside areas and clear zones where you have benches. And, it moves people and connects people to different destinations, but adjacent to a road. But it still must feel very safe, especially with traffic adjacent to you. And there's certain areas, especially down by the Beaver's House and Campbellton Road and rural areas where, people may want to share the road with multiple users, very low volume situations, so low speed. So there are different opportunities with shared use pathways, even what they're defining as advisory bike lanes, where you really slow traffic down. People can share sides of road. It's a very local road that we've done. So there's alternatives. The point is that there are alternatives to moving people around who are not in their cars. And that's something we want to emphasize. So as we move towards the end of the presentation, what I want to talk about a little bit is kind of how we've captured these different strategies for implementation. We're not going to go through all these in detail tonight. There's a lot of them. But the 5 ones overarching are historic preservation, infrastructure improvements, which can include really focusing on roadways, sanitary sewer, These are important critical aspects of infrastructure. Transportation and multimodal improvements. Development and conservation, and how you balance those two. And urban form and regulatory guidelines. Within these 5 strategies that we developed, we came up with kind of 4 catalyst projects or sites. All of these, I'm going to share these with you. All of these have multi-year timelines, but we see these as ways to really galvanize good development and good open space preservation within the study area. So I'm going to go ahead and begin going through these now, and then we'll end with some Q&A. So this is the Catalyst project map. We have one called the intersection, which I've spoken about a little bit already. We have the Campbellton Crossroads multi-use trail in this area. We have the former Methodist Church, which is what we envision as potentially a community art and cultural event space, which we've heard a lot from people. It gets people excited. And Campbellton Park and the expansion of Campbellton and what it means for the future. So with that, I'm going to begin briefly by talking about each of these. So part of this strategy for the roundabout is really rethinking this intersection. As I mentioned, looking at a roundabout, looking at how you develop construction plans, advocating doing that now so you can be, as we call, funding ready if additional funding resources come to fruition. And then concurrently, as development comes to fruition over the next 5 to 10 years, looking at with GDOT to do a speed limit reduction study on these corridors to slow traffic, lower the speed limit potentially, but also introducing other elements to help control that. Okay, so it's not just one thing you do, but it's a series of strategies to really address the crossroads. What I think is nice about this, though, is this becomes a real opportunity to do a central art sculpture feature, something that's really iconic and really represents both communities coming together. Is really a real opportunity here. So the real focus of the Campbellton Crossroads multi-use trail, this first, I call it the first segment of the trail, I think it'd be really beneficial, is this idea of connecting kind of on my screen, this kind of core of Campbellton downtown. Because once you get here, you can navigate down to the park, you can navigate different locations to the church and other historic cultural sites. But getting it from here and going east to an area, generally kind of a Les Jardins, Hampton Oaks area, there's a former commercial development that it's kind of partially developed, which would be a perfect trailhead, a logical trailhead, and then coming into here, and then the opposite end, the Methodist Church is a great trailhead. There's other areas where people could come in there, use the bike facilities, and really make it much more accessible. Otherwise, if you don't have something like this, people from the east are going to have to drive every time they want to Campbellton Park. They're going to have to drive in, park. It causes more transportation challenges because it's going to be a popular place. So how can we kind of reduce that long term and give people real opportunities locally who want to experience those natural amenities? So we think this is a real key catalyst project. The Cultural Center is another one. So this is today, just off of the screen is Campbellton, Fairburn, and Cascade Palmetto. Many of you will know this little slip lane that many of the people use coming down through here. This is always designed to kind of circumvent this intersection, I believe. And so we really think this needs to have a thoughtful redesign. First and foremost, what we're seeing is kind of squaring this off in here, providing these people here, eliminating this truck traffic through here, flying through here, making it safer to get to these existing people who live here already. Obviously preserving the existing cemetery, but then taking this Methodist church and doing a multi-tiered process of thinking it how it could be programming the space, ultimately preserving the space, using outdoor events you could do, you could have outdoor improvements. There's already a captive audience of people who bike from there. So if you think about that every weekend, imagine food trucks popping up there on Saturdays, a farmer's market at some point. There are just so many opportunities to do something with this space, but we see it as a tiered approach, something that you can begin working with the current property owner, maybe someone else comes in and develops it, kind of preserves it over time. We think there's a real opportunity to do that. You can even have the opportunity to create a historic interpretive trail off of this. And of course, long term, as we've shown our plans, future kind of village style development adjacent to the church. It becomes an anchor and a gateway for the community. And it really represents both communities, kind of bringing both communities together. And finally, Campbellton Park. There's already a lot going on with Campbellton Park. So we want to think holistically about how we make sure we can capture all the success from this. So first off, you already have the boat ramps going, if it's already completed. There is an idea of opening an outfitter so we can kind of, a vendor to kind of really manage what's going on there. Thinking about wayfinding and placemaking in this area, long-term consideration even for a temporary ferry to move people over to Douglas County and connect to the trails and amenities on this side. Long-term, there's a real opportunity, I think, to connect across with a separate pedestrian style Greenway Bridge, keeping in mind that this is a very much of a focus on my screen here where the Riverlands project was, of multi-use trails. The other potential to do a multi-use trail on this side of the road as well. Then long-term development underneath to the, I'd say, south and west of Campbellton Fairburn, kind of expand Riverfront Park with trails, amenities further down, which have already been kind of discussed on that, potentially discussed on that property. This is also interesting because this really creates a nice community node. This is a piece of property that potentially could be developed one day. Imagine, a great brewery, like event facility, some living and retail up here, great views of the river, access to the river. You have a captive audience up and down the river. We see this as a real opportunity for what's happening here. So there's a lot of potential here, but it begins with baby steps. It begins with thinking about how you proactively plan for visitation and proactively plan for expansion so you can navigate the popularity of this opportunity. And as I mentioned before, people in the local area getting access to this. This is why we promoted the trail and mobility options for people to get here safely. So all in all. So with that, that is really the crux of the presentation. As I mentioned, those catalytic projects, implementation plans is part of a larger strategy. Now what I'd like to do for the next few moments, it's about 6:45, I've been speaking for a while, and I want to thank you for your patience. As I mentioned before, you can go to the QR code and just snap it. It will access you to the app where we're going to use to answer, for you to ask questions and answer those questions. We're going to spend a few moments doing that. We'll be able to capture those questions. These questions are recorded. We'll know them. And as you answer or ask a question, we would invite others, if they have them, to vote for those questions. You like that question? That's a great idea. Post it or a comment. We're happy to take comments as well. And we'll be able to respond to those. So here for the next few minutes, we'll allow you to go in there and ask your questions. And if you don't have a QR code, you want to do it from your desktop or you want to type in, you simply go to pigeonhole.at and put in the password, CAMP, C-A-M-P 2020. So go ahead and take a moment, and I'll wait here for a moment as you may be asking some of those questions. So we already have a first question. I'm going to wait until a few more potentially come on the screen, and we'll begin kind of answering them several at a time. So, and if you like that question, vote for it. I always encourage people to vote for their own questions. I always vote for my own questions. There you go. There's one vote. Love it. So we'll go ahead and start with this first one because I had several votes. I see them coming up, so that's great. So I'm going to ask that first question. It's going to come up on the screen. as you can see. First question, what are the next steps? Great question. So our goal is to have this plan adopted by both communities. And we've initiated several different action items to move things forward. As I mentioned, there are several different catalyst projects. There are a number of different steps that can be done. So it's really going to be, we've outlined some those ideas. There's some very much short-term action approaches. I think some real key things that we've heard. There's been a lot of synergy between both respective staffs and elected officials on this. And so that conversation needs to continue. I think there's a real opportunity to create some type of task force and kind of citizens advisory committee to kind of continue pushing ideas in this area. There are implications to the zoning land uses of this area that need to be considered further. So there's a lot of those incremental policy steps that can be taken. But there's a lot of work to do, and it's going to be a multifaceted approach. So there's still some other questions on the screen. Yeah. So I'm going to start. I'm going to answer this one. It's about the BP. So what I can tell you is that, certainly I do not represent the city of Chattahoochee Hills on this, but there is still a plan on the books, so to speak, for the BP gas station. Where it is in the timeline, it's my understanding they've not submitted plans yet, or whether it's still an ongoing process. So, one of the things our fervent hope is that this plan can actually influence what is done at that site, and it's done in a way that is informative and considers the aesthetic of the entire area. But so right now, as all I can tell you is that it is still planned. And what I would encourage you all to do is, if you have those questions, is to reach out to Mike Morton at the city, and he can give you more details after this meeting. So I'm going to talk about the nearby neighborhoods. So we did to a certain degree, meaning that our first thought was there are obviously a number specifically communities to the east primarily, one location to the east. There are some further north. So in terms of what we thought as priority projects, we looked at Campbellton Fairburn as being the primary goal. There are a number of different spurs, numerous number of spurs that can be done further. So in reality, you could zoom out, which we didn't do this. This was not the scope of the project to zoom out and look at all those regional trails. But we did look at, in the immediate vicinity, where could we connect to spur this idea that you need to be connecting to multiple neighborhoods. So it can't just be one trail, but we can, our thought was, how do you create that spine and then build upon there and create that? And so once you begin developing these kind of initial trail components, it will then generate a tipping point to begin having more connections. And that was our goal here, is to inspire those thoughts. And looking at the plans especially for the major corridor, Cascade Palmetto looking north, we also look up that direction as well to a certain degree. You can really go in a lot of different directions. We tried to consider past plans, including the Riverlands project, and thinking about that as well. So the goal is really to inspire those future connections as part of this project. So I'm going to answer this one briefly because it relates, I think, to the BP gas station. So what I can tell you is, obviously, as I mentioned, there's a BP gas station, and opposite is the Texaco. I think, long-term, that Texaco gas station has been there for a while, and is very, I will use the word mature. So I'm, when you're thinking about that, probably keep in mind that long-term, probably that the existing gas station facility, that's not a long-term facility. Probably it's maybe reaching its life span. So there's probably always thought by the property owner to think about what's that next iteration. So they would be catty corner from each other as right now. based on the plans. But right now, that's really the only story. And so in terms of detail beyond that, that's really beyond the scope of the study. I would encourage you to speak to Mike Morton about this. Okay, so in terms of roundabouts, there is obviously the one, as I mentioned, the primary one we see as a catalyst site. This is at the intersection of Campbellton, Fairbanks, Cascade, Pomona, right in the heart of it. If you were to go towards Douglas County, that is Fairburn Campbellton Road, named slightly differently. And there's also an entrance to the private development opposite that. We think that as you enter the county, that'd be another good one. And then further east, we proposed one, and no general specific intersection right now, but there is a future intersection down that way, formerly going to Les Jardins. It's a little longer closed off. In general, we think there could be one there. It was very high level thought, so we could counterbalance the one on the other end of the corridor. That was really the thinking. So I hope that it clarifies your location about where those are. So the question is, how do you share, what's the typical process for this? Well, every community does things slightly differently. There are communities that have development authorities or downtown development authorities, those types of authorities that will actively work to share plans like that with developers. The communities also have the right, the staff and elected officials, to share that and bring people in. So there really is no one standard process. And developers all looks different, right? They're all shaped, they all perform the businesses slightly differently. They all approach development slightly differently. They all have slightly different funding mechanisms. So it really depends on the developer of how they might approach it and how you might approach a particular developer. So there are a variety of processes. What we have encouraged, and we've talked to the respective city staffs and officials, to say, be proactive and identify, educate yourselves and identify some of those key, maybe key developers, if that's the goal, and talking to them and seeing what their interest is to gauge that. That's really what those economic development professionals are. And that's really the goal of that. And that's they represent that for the project. So that's really what we've encouraged. And like I said, all developments take a slightly different path, but there is always that kind of successful developments involve really good communication between the cities and the private owners of the development of the land. So this is permanent quote aquifer. That's a great question. I'm going to plead ignorance a little bit to that. There's got to be some, I'm sure, some type of permitting to do that. This was kind of a creative idea to bring back. There was a historic fair there into the mid-1960s. That's how people got across the river for a long time. And so our thought would be, wouldn't this be kind of a cool interim step to get across the river? It could be run by the outfitter even. The reality is, I have to plead ignorance. I don't know about permitting. I assume there's some sort of permitting to put a structure in the river and to cross that. But that's a really good point. We something that we can do a little research on and consider that and provide that input, especially to the city of Chattahoochee Hills and for Douglas County folks, because it was something that's very high level we thought of right now as kind of a potential, but something to kind of bring back and highlight, bring back the story about the original ferry is really the goal of that. So that's a great question. The question comes in now, are there any discussions with Douglas County on similar development on their side of the river? We've had some initial discussions just about kind of what's going on around Douglas County. Some of the data that was collected for certainly the kind of the high level market analysis was looking at that. We know of some future development we've heard about on the other side of the river, whether it's industrial, commercial development, we've heard that. The reality is, our takeaway is that there's going to be a lot more activity, especially on Douglas County side in the next few years, especially up into the north and northwest of this study area. There's obviously a very big interest in this area right now. We're performing the study. So there is a lot of interest. And so I think what I can tell you is this can help set a precedent for how this development interacts and communicates. We really think this is such a unique area that what developer comes to the table will have to consider those outside developments, but also can create a market of their own, really. It's such a unique environment. So I'm gonna tackle this first one. So let's talk about. I'm gonna begin with the answer. The question is, what is the time frame for each step? There's a lot of steps. There's a lot of different recommendations. I'll tell you that, number one. What I can tell you overall is that this is really a 10 to 20 year vision. Now, it doesn't mean you have to wait 10, 20 years for development to occur, but it is a long-term vision for how this might look. And things might accelerate or change differently. We all have to keep in mind this is private land. And so it is in the hands of the private owners and what they choose to do with their land and how they, if they choose to sell or they choose to develop it themselves, it will take a lot of different, it might look very different. And so it is a little bit unknown. Now, let's change our attention to the public investment projects. We think there are some very immediate steps you can take today on each of those. So for the roundabout, our encouragement would be, assuming you'd have to find public local funding, that would have to be something that both cities would want to do and participate in looking at how you spend capital improvement dollars. And I know that can be challenging, especially with COVID, and especially with already allocated dollars. But is there a way to fund the design of these roundabouts, especially the primary roundabout now in the next year and a half or so? The same would be true for to the city of South Fulton and looking at that connection to Les Jardins. What are the partnerships available? How can they go ahead and advance that project now? There are a lot of opportunities, I think, to potentially do that and move that ahead. There's a number of different partnerships, whether it's Trust for Public Land, the Conservation Fund for Land Acquisition, local funds. And there's a number of different pots and people they can connect with to help develop a strategy. But again, the goal would be to go ahead and design it now so that we think we've been hearing a lot. I will say that, whatever happens, and we don't know, there's a lot of unknowns here in 2021 with new federal administration, what it looks like. But whatever its final form, we think it's going to have, people are going to look at COVID relief dollars. How can cities be eligible and plan for maybe using COVID relief dollars to fix connectivity issues, public health benefits? We just don't know what that's going to look like. So there are opportunities there. So planning and designing now helps prepare each community for the future. So those are immediate steps. When we talk about the cultural center, it's really going to require, I think this is where the both preservation commissions, historic commissions can come together. This could be a really great opportunity to look at advocate for that. And in cooperation with kind of the economic development personnel from the respective communities to look at how you activate that space. And the goal will be to identify in the next year and a half or so, year and a half, who are those advocates at each community level to help bring this forward to move it ahead. And so I think I think in the Campbellton Park, it's kind of ongoing. There's a lot of synergy at Campbellton Park. So just to maintain that and build upon that, but that's going to be several years down the way. But it's already happening with the boat launch and things like that. So as popularity increases, there will be a demand to see some of these expansions and changes to Campbellton Park. So again, it's hard to say it's going to be 1 year, 10 years, 20 years, 6 months. Each of them have some of their own time frame, but the goal is to start now and really begin thinking proactively about creating the steps now. So it's 7 o'clock. I'm going to quickly answer this one final question. So following adoption of a master plan by the two cities, who created the partnership to sustain advocacy and lists other government entities such as GDOT and Fulton County? So that's a great question. First, I will say there are a lot of advocates at the staff level who've been great partners and at the elected official level who want to see this happen. So it's really going to create those champions there and maintaining the relationships that have already existed and moving that forward. And then you have, obviously, the Atlanta Regional Commission is a great partner. They're there. They can be a really great resource to bring and navigate people and bring people together in a room to really help start that process. There's a lot of really smart people in both communities who have really great relationships with GDOT and Fulton County and Douglas County. So they're the people, there are the right people are in the room, and they have the relationships. And that's what I'm encouraged by as part of this. So it really requires that kind of task force coming together and thinking about implementation and what it might look like. Well, it's 7 o'clock. I know some people have dropped off. Obviously, it's dinner time for a lot of people. It's a very busy time of the year. I just want to say in conclusion, thank you very much. I'm going to go here to the last slide here. So if you have additional questions, Aubrey is, as a resource, as a point person, email them Aubrey. Mike is the representative for the city of Chattahoochee Hills, and Dana is his counterpart in South Fulton. Both would be happy to answer a lot of those specific questions about the gas stations, about potential next steps. Hey, I want to get more involved. Call Mike, call Dana. If you have a question about the plan, let us know. Again, thank you again for your time. As I mentioned, this is being recorded. We will post it online in the next week or so other people can see it. So thank you again for everything.